I am here today to discuss with you the emotionally healthy leader. Uh, and this is based on um, the first two books that Pete Cazzaro um, wrote. And so that's the foundation of these other books, like the discipleship book that Pete has written, and the healthy leader book, and there's a couple of other things that he has written also. But the first two sessions tells us about how to become a better, stronger, and closer to God, be it a pastor or be it just a member of the church or be a volunteer at the church. And these things are not just for um, the people to be spiritually, but it's also works on emotional uh, abilities as well. And the first book talks about the emotional side of us, ourselves, and it covers a lot of topics about knowing how the origin of your family as a child and teenager uh, has effect on who we are today. And it's each book has 8 chapters in that book, and it's a lot of good tools that people can use to get to know themselves a lot better, but also get to know how to be closer to God. The second book is called Relationships, and that has 8 chapters as well. And that encourages us to be in a relationship as strong as we can with everybody, not just God, but with the staff at the church or family or neighbors or congregation. We want to be as close to God as we can humanly be, which is a struggle to say the least. But he gives you a day by day book, and that's devotional that he gives to people who um, want something that they can do on a daily basis, and a workbook. Now, I hope everybody has downloaded the Emotionally Healthy Leaders Workbook that Evelyn has, because each one of these chapters in the Emotionally Healthy Leader has questions that you can answer. And when you do get to that part of it, I encourage you to be truthful to yourself and not try to keep things under the rug, as they say, or in the closet. Because Pete wrote these books, those 16 chapters, be a foundation of not only emotional health, but of growing in our spirituality as well. So I do recommend, if you do not have any or did not know of emotionally healthy spirituality, that's the first book that Pete wrote. Um, I would encourage you to find that book and to read it, because those 16 chapters are the foundation and the way that he explains and his expectations he has. He talks about everything from elephants in a room to how to make a rule of life. And if people don't know what a rule of life is, it's a living document that is changed as we go through every seasons of our lives. You know, you're a single person, you get married, you have kids. Those kids have grow up to be teenagers and 20 somethings that might still be in your life. And the rule of life gives you a foundation for setting um, the do's and the don'ts, if you will, for children in your life, be it your children or even grandchildren and neighbors, kids. And I mean, these books and this chapter helped everybody um, understand. You want to be aware of some of your low self-esteem. That's what Pete was talking about uh, when that video was playing. Um, and he doesn't want your leadership to become the number one thing in your life, because if you're married or if you're even single, Pete says, let your family and let your close friends and neighbors if you're a single person. Um, be what will bring you greater relationships with them and everybody. Um, you want to do for God. We all do. Everybody serves God in some way, shape, or form. But you want it to be balanced with the amount of time that you also are with God in many different various ways. You could just be driving down the road and you see an accident and you feel sorry and you want to stop, but you know you can't stop because you got that meeting you got to get to. You just say a prayer. You just, hope that everybody is well and no serious injuries. Um, and Sabbath, Pete really believes that on the seventh day, and the seventh day doesn't have to be Sunday, it could be a 24-hour period. For example, my wife and I take our Sabbath from 6 p.m. on Saturday night to 6 p.m. on Sunday night. And that's because when we're both retired now, so we can take it whenever we need it. But um, we found that that fit into our work schedule very easily. And so Pete wants everyone to understand to take a 24-hour period where you don't let the demands that is put on leadership. It doesn't have to be anything with the church, but some sort of a demand that takes you away from being able to rest on that 24-hour period. And he is a true believer in that. And he also believes some people have the um, understanding that bigger is better and that more money is better and that that's kind of superficial in the way he tries to explain it because bigger is not always better, as we know. And there's more mm, things out there other than sin. You got lust, you got people wanting more money that can never be satisfied with the amount of money that they're making. And they forget about some of the things that the family were hoping they would be able to do. All that creates unhealth of some sort and emotionally stress as well. But spiritually and emotionally, he needs to be balanced. He wants us to be balanced with not just doing for God, but taking the same amount of time to be with God, personal. And every person needs to do that personally in their own. You can't do the same thing that your spouse is doing or that your kids are doing, but at least give them that foundation that they know in a rule of life that you should always take that time uh, and build up your strength in heaven, as um, a pastor I once had told me. He says, "Yeah, you're doing good. You come into church every Sunday. You're reading the Bible. You're going to this, worship services and all that stuff. But how often do you sit down and have a conversation with God?" I said, "Well, I really don't know." And so that happened to me when I was about 48 years old. And ever since then, I have had daily conversations and prayer time. And I like to journal. And that's one thing that Pete Cazzaro also um, had me do. I met him on 3 different occasions. And the first one, he said, "Do you journal?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, why don't you start journaling? And the next time I'll see you, bring me your journal." And so I did. And from that day to now, I have been journaling, and it really helps me understand what I do, how I did it. Um, did I offend anybody? I hope not. But if you journal and you put that in there, then that's going to be something to give you a eye opener, if you will, about the way maybe that you reply to people, that you have body language, is things like that. Um, and are you truly emotional? If someone tries to give you a positive criticism, Do you accept it or do you get a little upset about it? You know? So all of these things are in what Pete describes as having those issues being an unhealthy leader. And that's in chapter 1 of that workbook. And then chapter 2 of the workbook, he calls it Face Your Shadow. And he says that this is an accumulation of untamed emotions that you might not even be aware that you're doing it. The shadow reveals itself very clearly when you're in a leadership position, whatever that leadership might be. It might be a life group, it might be coaching youth basketball or football team or whatever your likings are for helping your family. Uh, so people have a ability to speak, but the words come out of the mouth and you can't put them back in there. And so we like to have a review, and having a ledger is a good way to do that, because if you keep track of what you do and what you did every day, um, it's this helps gives you a pursuit to be a better person and to be closer to God as well, and to try to become the friend uh, that you wish maybe your next door neighbor could be, or something like that. But um, it is a hard task because I went through it, and I know that um, it took me probably 3 months before I really did start measuring in a good way. But what really helped me was when I did the genogram, and the genogram is going back and identifying not just your parents, but your parents' parents, so your grandparents, and then your great grandparents, if they are still alive and you have been part of their life, or they part of your life. So feedback from trustworthy sources is very, very important. And one of the most trustworthy source uh, is ourselves, because we know exactly what we did, we know exactly when we did it, and we know exactly how we handled the situation. So um, we have oh, I would think in this world today, just about anything and everything that is going in the opposite direction of the word is going in the direction of the world. And how can that ever be tamed or controlled? Or how could we ever find a way to provide positive, spiritual, um, and emotional ways in our life that people around us see? Uh, and hopefully they see the change of emotional spirituality, as well as just plain old good old the Bible words. Those words in the Bible. Every week, the pastor at church, he reads a chapter out of the Bible, and then he says the Word of God. And so a lot of people don't understand that. So especially if you are a pastor and you're trying to grow your congregation, and you start having um, conversations with them, uh, what might be one step that you would be able to change about maybe your body language, or the way you express something, or you know yourself better than anybody. So try to figure out one thing that you could do when it comes to your shadow in order to be able to present a better emotional response, and for that matter, in your heart, a strong spiritual reply. to the people that you are having those conversations with. And then on chapter 3, it's lead out of your marriage or your singleness. And Pete is very he's got 4 daughters, and he is very much in a belief that for the first 17 years, he was trying to build a church, and he was trying to write this book, and he was trying to do this and that, and some of the things that the family wanted to do, Pete was never there for. And I went through the same thing with my job. Um, I had to travel 2 to 3 weeks a month, and that really hurt my family because I wasn't able to be at my son's concerts. He's a saxophone player, and he was a leader in a Michigan State University saxophone session of the band. I missed more than I saw. My daughter was an all-round athlete. She played softball, volleyball, basketball. Um, she even ran track and did the high jump. And I missed all of that. So never let the demands on you. We all have demands that we need to meet, and we have due dates that we have to make, but we don't have to let it go to an extreme that would hurt the family. Um, and that goes for brothers and sisters, siblings, um, as well. You know, the leader needs to bear witness to God's love for the whole world. And that's what he tries to bring out in chapter 3 of this workbook. And each chapter of the workbook, they have at least 5 or 6 questions that it asks people. Like one of the ones in the um, marriage, lead out of your marriage, is a question that it says, review your leading out of your marriage assessment on page 88 and 89 in the book. He even tells people the pages in the book that he's asking about. And he says, what are 1 or 2 things that you have learned about yourself that you didn't realize before? So those types of questions are in every chapter of that workbook. And then chapter 4, it talks about slowing down for a loving union with God. And today, how many times have you gone to a restaurant and you see a sign up there, please be patient with us. We only have 3 wait staffs. And where they used to have 7 wait staffs, you know? And we've been to this restaurant that we really like here. The food is still delicious because the owner is the chef, and but he cannot get people to work. Uh, I just don't understand that because I started working when I was 10 years old with my paper route, and I have been still working to this day in some way, shape, or form. But slowing down to be a loving union, it's access to every areas of our life. I mean, it can. He points out in this book that it could be at the church. It could just be at any kind of organization that you might be a member of, like C1N, for example. Uh, or you might want to be a coach for your kids' teams, or you might want to teach your daughter or son or somebody how to play a guitar or a piano or drums or whatever it might be. But you turn around to him and said, I'm so sorry. I have to go and do this. It's demanding. I have to have this done by tomorrow. And so not only does it hurt you inside to have to tell them that, but it hurts their feelings 10 times more than it hurts your feelings. And so just don't get too much on your plate, I guess is one way to put it. Don't let it fall through the cracks or I lost my schedule. I didn't know what I did with it. I forgot about it. I mean, don't do that. And again, ledger every day, things that happen. And if you do that, you are going to see areas that need to be changed into a healthy leader instead of being an unhealthy leader, both the church and number one, to the family. And then chapter 5 is talked about the Sabbath and the Sabbath delight. And I mentioned that to you earlier, but it's a 24-hour block of time that you are in a non-work uh, position. You are at rest. You might like painting, and so you could be painting. You like music, and you want to just listen to some nice mellow classical rock, whatever your genre is, um, and stop for a while and rest and be able to be in an emotional feeling of delight instead of in a emotional feeling of, oh, why did I say yes to this? I should have said no. What is going on with me? You know? So Pete brings that out and he gives you some really good questions in that part of the book, in that chapter. To I like the Moses one here. It says Moses stayed away from a loving union with God and took matters into his own hand when he struck the rock with his staff out of anger and frustration. Well, you know what that led Moses to, you know? So you striking a rock is telling your kids, yeah, I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to be there for you. We'll do that. And then you turn around and say, no, can't do it. Um, that's going to hurt them a whole lot. And then chapter 5 goes to, if you do practice Sabbath, he wants you to, one other thing I wanted to mention was that he wanted you to take a place of revelation. In other words, he told and expressed it to me as going out for a hike by yourself, um, a 4 hour hike, and just have a discussion with God, for example, and just look at the beauty of that path that you're on in the mountains or in the woods or by the ocean. He wants you to have a moment of silence in your mind because how many times have you gone to bed at night and you just can't go to sleep because you got 1,000 things swirling around in your mind and you go outside on a Sunday morning and you walk down the street and all of a sudden it starts snowing and it's beautiful. Those two things are very, very different. And it's something that everybody has probably felt and experienced at one time. So he really wants you to have a Sabbath delight. And then chapter 6 is for planning and decision making. Uh, does anybody there ever have to plan and make decisions? Let me see if you haven't. Raise your hands if you haven't done that. So, being a leader and making plans um, is part of being a leadership. If you're in a leadership, you have to expect that you're going to have to plan things and you're going to have to make decisions about the date and the time and how many people can we handle and what is going to be the topic, what's the best way to present it, all that good stuff. Um, but when you do that alone and you at a moment say, let me think about this. Now, what would I do? What should I do? Okay, I got it. Yeah, okay. And I write it down. I write it down. I try it that way, and it turned out to be a total failure. I mean, it just bombed out. What was missing in that formula was I didn't turn to God. I didn't ask, Father, I'm at a wall right now. I need some advice. And this ask him to shine upon you um, how to be successful um, by coming to him and asking him, by praying. Um, and when you pray, um, God has no limits. So don't be afraid to ask him for whatever it is that you might need. Uh, don't define success as always being right. Sometimes success comes by taking the time to be with God. And instead of writing down that one thing that I wrote down that I thought was really great, and then 3 days later, after it was over, I found out something that God had shared with me that I should have called him right up front because he gave me a really good um, answer to that prayer that I gave to him. But limits, it shouldn't stop us from being a leader. Um, as you look at 4 characteristics of an emotionally healthy planning and decision making, which do you think God is inviting you to embrace it more fully? And he has 4 bullet points to that question. It says to define success as radically doing God's will, to create a space for heart preparation. That's a good one for me. To pray for prudence and to look for God in our limits. We're the ones that have limits. We think we can do it without going to God, and because God has a bigger limit than we have. And so, culturally, um, a lot of people don't understand how a Christian can go to God and how God will always answer that. It's difficult for a lot of people to even believe in the Spirit. Um, but I believe fully in prayer. I know prayer helps. We have a lady at church that fell off of a ladder 15 feet to the ground, and she broke uh, her backbone and her spine at the bottom half of her spine. And but nobody was with her. She thought she could do it herself. And her husband is a pastor at our church. And he said, now you wait till I get home. I'll be home and I'll help you. She thought she could do it herself. And fortunately, she had her phone in her pocket. So she took her phone out and dialed 911. And within 15 minutes, her husband was home because um, he was on time. um, she cried for days and days and days about thinking that she could do that on her own. And she felt not only painful, she was in a hospital. She stayed in the ICU for a week. And for the first 3 days she was in the ICU, they said she just laid there and cried about the foolishness that made her fall off that ladder. She was doing something that she should have never done. I tell my wife, you're not going to climb a ladder by yourself. And my kids, I said, if you want to climb a ladder, come get me and I'll let you get up in that tree and get the ball out of it. So it is very important to know and limit what we think are our limits, you know? And then chapter 7 in the workbook, this talks about culture and team building. Uh, Now, who has not ever had conversations with people from other nations and other mm, genres of music, let's say, if we're having a conversation about jazz or rock or classical, something like that. Every culture has their ingrown knowledge that the genogram, the origin of the family, is going to be a good tool that will identify a lot of things for you, especially if your grandparents came over from Romania, or they came over from Russia, or they came over from Italy or France, Spain, Australia, Hawaii. Every one of those is a different culture, and they have different beliefs, and they have different ways of living, and especially different ways of cooking. So culture is a uh, I have been around the world. I was in the Navy, and I have known people from all those countries that I mentioned there. There's in Pete's book here, he says there are 4 core characteristics of emotionally healthy culture and team building, and an organizational culture and team are healthy. And here's what he says. He's got 4 bullets: work performance and personal spiritual formation are inseparable. Performance and personal spiritual formation are inseparable. The elephants in the room are acknowledged and confronted. How many times have you been sitting in a meeting and you know that the topic has been discussed time and time again, but that topic, that elephant, is still going to be in that room? And if you never speak to it, what's going to happen? That elephant's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's much better to confront something like that up front than it is to let us grow. Another bullet here is time and energy are invested in the team's personal spiritual development. So we have people from different cultures, and I have been fortunate to work tech with a 80 group of ladies that do not speak English as their first language. They are all second language ladies. And they had me do the tech on all 3 of those sessions that I've been able to do. And everybody there is friendly. Everybody there is caring and loving. Uh, there was not one nasty, thinkful hate about anybody. And I don't know if you've seen that little square on your TV about the Jewish people and the 2% of that square, and yet they're getting 55% of the hatred in the world right now. Um, there is people all over the world, and I have traveled France, even Belgium, Holland, Germany. I've been to a lot of places, and the people like each other. And we all know that there's a spiritual war going on out there, and it is growing day by day. So it's not the people, it's it's life itself. And how can I describe life itself? Well, you got the government involved, you got the medical involved, you have the terrorist involved, you have Satan involved, blah blah blah. You just keep going. and it is a warfare going on out there right now. So to build a team of cultural people, with each one of them being different, the qualities of people's marriages and the foundation that they are brought up on is going to be a big part of who they are. And it's going to be totally different than who we are. But what we need to share among each other is the good word. And we need to help them emotionally. Don't be afraid to go up if you know someone um, just had a serious accident. Let's say, like this other lady at our church did. She had people that she didn't even know at church send her cards and send her, one lady sent her a poem, and people just flooded their home with baked casseroles and pizzas, and you name it. And I mean, what is the way to help build teams in a world with that kind of an environment? That's what we need to do for each other. And that's what chapter 7 talks about in that building the culture. And it's 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 powerful in the book. I remember that chapter. And now in chapter 8, he talks about the power that we have and the wise boundaries, the power that we have from being a leader in any kind of a position, like I've mentioned before. If you're um, doing a youth team, be it basketball or football or baseball, whatever it is, you're in a position of power because you're the coach. And if you are a life group leader, and I have been 4 life group leaders over the past 10 years, um, people look to me because I was the leader of the group. You have certain types of power, though, and Pete lists them in chapter 8 of the workbook. And he says it's a critical need for every leader is to become aware of their power, i.e., their capacity to influence and the power of the gift for those that they serve, enabling them to come more fully alive and flourish with their actions. And he says here, every leader needs to be aware of the 6 primary sources of power. You have positional power, personal power, the God factor power, projected power, relational power, and cultural power. If and he also tells us that if we want to use our power as Christians and Christ followers, uh, he gives us 3 points that we should be aware of and that we must do. And that is, to yourself, identify and inventory the power that you think you have. Carefully steward your power so it comes important to others. You know, they can see it in you. And then acknowledge and monitor a dual relationship. Sometimes you might be a coach on a little league team, and you got their parents in your life group, and the parents wonder why you let their kids play so much. And I say, well, he has a natural ability. I didn't teach him how to throw. I didn't teach him how to swing a bat. I didn't teach him how to steal base. Um, it's something that he already knew. I'm just using that as an example. But of course, dual relationships with pastors, that's something that is sometimes difficult. I have seen it happen in a church where the pastor is actually on a basketball um, team, a men's conference basketball league. And then he has the referee in his life group. So a lot of people thought that the referee was just looking the other way sometimes when that pastor fouled somebody. So those types of relationships are real, and they can be very difficult um, for people to handle them. But just remember that ever how healthy you think your power and wise boundaries are, ledger them down and keep a ledger on those types of things, because that might bring a bright light into your awareness that you were never aware of before. Pete says here, name one dual relationship, meaning having more than one role in somebody's life, and over and how you can build some safeguards into that relationship. Well, the pastor of the church in his life group pulled him aside one night and he says, "You know what?" He says, "I did foul that." And I said, he says, "If you see me foul somebody, you got to blow that whistle." And so ever since that day, he's been playing basketball and the guy's still being a ref. And he's just like one of the other guys. And then chapter 9, most of Pete's books has only 8 chapters, but with the emotionally healthy leader, he put a 9th one in there. And this one in the 9th chapter is talking about endings and new beginnings. And I heard this when I was down in Miami at the C1N conference, and that is about transitions. There's a lot of pastors that we had one at our church. The head pastor transitioned. He retired, and for the last year and almost a year and a half now, the new pastor has made his new beginning in our church. And he came from a really good church in Royal Oak, Michigan. Uh, and for him to come to Oak Point Church um, was a good thing for Oak Point Church. But we need to embrace endings. I know some people find it very, very difficult to know what to do when they retire. Some people die earlier than they should because they just didn't have anything to live for, they felt like. And then the new beginnings are like this young man that came into the church from another church, and we accept him. We didn't poo-poo him, as they say. We treat him with respect. Um, we accept his way of presenting the message, which is fantastic in my way of thinking. Um, they there needs to be things you learn about yourself with both endings and with new beginnings. And in that chapter 9 book, he has questions in here that, again, go back to the basics, your family of origin. Um, how has your family of origin, your life experience, and your church background shaped you for the view of your innings? Boy, that's a lot to consider. Now, he also says consider 4 characteristics of emotionally healthy endings and new beginnings. And so he asked each one of us, he says, which one is most important to you to pay attention to. So whichever the case may be. So we accept that endings are death. We recognize that endings and waiting in the confusing, he calls that the in-between state, will often take much longer than we think. Uh, and that has happened to me many times. We view endings and waiting and but inextricably, I can't even say the word, linked to our personal maturing in Christ. So we need to get personal with Christ, and the better relationship we have with Christ, then it's going to be better for either the ending and the beginning. And then he says to affirm that endings and waiting at the gateway to the new beginning. That's right, because the, the the one thing that really stood out for me in that chapter was the way he put it. It made me think of the way Christ went through what the Father gave him to do. He asked if that cup could be taken back, and the Father said no. So he said, okay. He went through with it. And of course, he was buried in the tomb. And then what happened? Well, the tomb was empty. That gave us a doorway to heaven. That gave us death is not a death. Death is a new beginning that gives us the pathway that we have to see God face to face. And if anyone has any questions, um, Evelyn has my contact information. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you read in this book. I just skimmed through it with you just to give you a feeling for make sure that you read the Foundations, which is book 1 and 2 of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and then read the Emotionally Healthy Leader. And after you read that book, open up this workbook and go through it. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to discuss them with you. Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate that, Randall. Yeah, we did some of this work a number of years back. Many of us, or at least I know that Matt and Chris and I went through this material with um, Emotionally Healthy Leader, and the genograms. Some of the things that were there were very, very helpful. So really appreciate you doing this for us. And everybody knows Randall's a place you can go for those resources.